Welcome to Expedition Networking, a special segment of the Networking RX podcast. I'm Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and your host for this program. For those of you who are familiar, on the Networking RX podcast, we share information and have conversations with experts, such as authors, researchers, and social scientists. And all of these programs are aimed at helping you learn how to become better at building professional relationships and understanding why they work. In this Expedition Networking segment, however, we're going to bring on successful entrepreneurs and unique professionals and explore their networking adventure and learn how they used relationships to create lasting success. Today on Expedition Networking, we have Rusty Allen. Rusty is a longtime electronic payment professional and a networking enthusiast. Rusty, welcome to the program today.
Glad to be here, Frank.
Let's just start in. You and I have known each other for several years now. Kind of want to get people's perspective on your story. I know you've been in electronic payments, merchant services, credit cards, debit cards. You've been in that industry for a long time and had quite a background in networking. If you'd kind of give us your story, that would be a great way to kind of kick things off.
Oh, absolutely. Appreciate the chance to do that. When I left college, a much younger man, I had a social work degree and realized those skills transition just fine to the business world. So after about 10 years of social work, I was approached about a sales opportunity in business and insurance, which eventually led me into business-to-business sales and credit card processing. But in the process of that early sales career, I was sitting down at someone's kitchen table, and he had stopped me and said, "Rusty, just a minute." And he went and got his phone. This was prior to cell phones, right, and called the neighbor and said, "You've got to hear what I'm being told right now." And he put me on the phone with this neighbor, and it set the next appointment. And I'm like, wow, that's the power of referral or networking or someone else's voice. And how do I translate that into a larger scale? So at my next position, I actually created a networking group with another person where we ran ads actually and said we were looking for other business professionals to network. And we created an every other week networking group that we built up to about 35 people. And there's a lot you learn from that process, but that led me into BNI, which I know you and a lot of your listeners are familiar with. Became a member and director of that organization for quite some time. And again, that was an eye opener because at that point I had fully transitioned to merchant services. And I just realized I had an entirely different sales process when I had been referred, recommended, introduced. It wasn't so salesy. Mm-hmm. It was more, well, Spencer sent you. He said you can do this. Is that right? Tell me about it. And off you went. That trust process is much quicker when you're networking. And I've always applied that since then. Including making a big effort to stay in contact with people that I've been introduced to from some time ago. I think that's an easy piece for us to miss. We're always looking to meet someone new. Well, there's a lot that we can do for our network and cultivate from our network if we just stay in touch. So that's a big part of my story.
No, I think that's a really interesting. Very interesting that somebody would, pick up the phone and call the neighbor. And for many people listening that, we didn't have cell phones. So it was literally bolted to the wall, right?
Yeah.
And basically make an endorsement for you. Was that the point where you I guess you've already said that was the point where you really realized, hey, there's something to this. I don't have to be knocking on doors all the time.
Yeah, it was incredible because this person had never met me or heard my voice. We set an appointment on the phone. He's like, yeah, I need to talk to you about exactly the same thing. It literally, that was one of the shortest appointments of my life because he had the information he wanted And instead of me selling him, he had been recommended or sold by Bruce, the gentleman I was with that night. So yeah, it was a huge wake up call. It's like I can sell in a completely different way and help people in a different way if I have a relationship, if I have a recommendation.
Now, I guess you
Yeah.
need to reflect back to this, but when you go home at that point, do you tell friends, spouse, or whoever, hey, you're not going to believe what happened? Is that kind of a, because I mean, I can see myself at that point saying, wow, this is astonishing. And I think back to when I was first started in the private practice of law, having those sorts of things happen where, I remember being at lunch with a client and the client seeing somebody new and inviting the person over and saying, listen, you need an attorney. This is your guy. Oh, give me your card. Those are special things, but that's really how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, I was so excited to tell that story. And then I went and how do I make this happen more often? And my first thought is like, well, I can just simply ask people. If I'm getting a good response, who do you know that's like you that would appreciate getting this same information? So I really kind of stumbled upon it. I wish I could say it was some genius thing, but stumbled upon it and just continued that pattern.
Well, I think we all stumble upon it, Rusty. They don't teach it in college.
No.
Right? They don't. I mean, they talk to it. I took a different path. I was in a business school, and they talk to it, and that relationships and connections are. But it's literally no more than we've just said right here. And I think part of that is when you get into college and university settings, the instructors, they don't really live the life of networking like we do. It's certainly not from a sales perspective. Now they might do it to further their research in that, but they don't have that class to.
True. And that's a really unique thing about AmSpirit and organizations like AmSpirit is that you do actually teach some practical things to this. And that just took my networking into an entire another level when I got more formal about it and actually leading that initial group as a volunteer. The things that you try to start and teach other people, we learn well. You learn something entirely different when you're trying to teach it.
Yeah.
So that's a huge value in itself to an organization like AmSpirit or a networking or referral group.
Yeah. Well, once you discover that there's something there, one neighbor referring you to another, I think then you start to look for more patterns. You look for more things that work, things that you say, because it doesn't always work flawlessly like that. No. But it does. It doesn't work flawlessly, but it still works. But there are certainly things to it. You have to have that first great relationship. One, you have to have that person who's willing to make that call for you, willing to, to share their trust with a neighbor. And not everybody is. I don't think everybody's even willing to give you names if you ask.
No, that's true. And also when you get that fortunate first experience, you have to figure out that it's a different situation. You're excited, but you don't need to do the same old things. It's a different process. And I see a lot of people not tweak that process right away. They stay in their old familiar ways. Yeah. And when you're selling on a recommendation or a referral, it's not the same process. And so there's a little bit of a learning curve to that. It's a good problem to have, but it's a different process.
Yeah, no, you obviously can't go into that neighbor. We'll keep picking on that situation and go through the sales pitch because you're already there. You've already been recognized or been recommended and recognized as the expert. And so you need to kind of skip to page 4, if you will, of your script.
Right, exactly.
Because you don't want to annoy them. That was very interesting, very interesting. And obviously you continue to use relationships. Why would you not go back once you've figured it out? I guess here's a question. When was the last cold call you made?
A few weeks ago. I mean, sometimes when I'm out in the community, I'll stop somewhere close to
Okay.
try to make them not cold. In this case, it's like, hey, I just helped you. Do you know any of your neighbors here that I could stop in, introduce myself? So even then I did that to alleviate it being cold. I said, I've just worked with your neighbor across the street here, and he suggested I come by and introduce. I I don't know how you define cold call, Frank, but
Sure.
that's as cold as it gets for me these days.
Okay. Well, that's fair. To be honest, with your track record, I figured you probably couldn't remember, but do I consider what you're doing is cold? Certainly it's not red hot. It's not, hey, you got to talk to Rusty. I'm sending him over as soon as we sign here. But it's not, hey, I've got a list, and we don't really have phone books anymore, but it's not, I got this business list. I'm just going to start working down, and would you have an appointment with me?
Yeah.
So
It's been a long time since I've done that.
It's lukewarm.
I'm not sure the
Yeah.
last time I went down a list.
Well, and I wonder how many people we lose in the business world because they never get to where you're at or even close to it. They've never had that. They've never asked for that recommendation. They've never gotten that referral. It is literally day after day of working the phones and getting an appointment, making the sale, and coming back and working the phones, and just burning out on that at some point.
I suspect a lot. I think that's one thing I've seen with networking is I think too many people give up on it too soon.
Yeah.
Because the idea sounds wonderful and people think it's going to happen right away. But trust is not built right away. And now with so many networking activities being available online, you have to transition that to an offline relationship. And I think too many people stop networking too soon. And some of that is exactly what you said. They're frustrated, burned out on cold calling, burning through a list, getting rejected. And it carries over to networking. And I'm always pleased when I see a sales organization that a big part of their training is networking, because those organizations, from what I can tell, keep their people much longer. They're much happier.
Yeah. Well, let's transition here. Let's talk about Rusty and your business and the things you're doing and what could be good opportunities for you, and certainly work in there how people could get a hold of you. That all those things would be helpful to you, but helpful for the audience as well.
Sure. I do electronic payments or merchant services. Simply anybody that takes credit cards, debit cards, gift cards, as you alluded to earlier, are businesses that I can help. Now, that being said, I've tweaked my business model so that I'm becoming more of a niche or an expert in certain areas. It lets me be more useful to people. So good referrals for me would be businesses that we call multi-commerce, meaning they take cards a variety of ways. They might take it on a website. They might have people out in the field, like a plumbing or an HVAC company, where those folks are calling in cards or maybe swiping or tipping a card. There's also businesses where they take cards in person, but then they have their customers they never see. They enter it in a portal or what we call a virtual terminal. So multi-commerce businesses or clients that take cards a variety of ways, well equipped to help. And also I've developed a group of clients in the non-card present arena, because their challenges are entirely different than a pizza place or a restaurant or the types of places where you and I tend to think of using our card. They need completely different advice and completely different services. So those are good referrals for me as well.
I mean, that last group you talked about, I mean, we're talking about like artisans who might be at a fair or those sorts of people who I'm trying to.
That's a good clarification. I'm talking more about business to business. Might be folks in manufacturing, promotional products where they're shipping their products out and They don't actually see that client often. but they need a way to take cards, even though it's almost never face to face.
Gotcha.
Now, that being said, your example of artisans, they would fit more in the multi-commerce because they probably do fairs, depending on where they are in the country.
Yeah.
And they could take cards face to face, but a lot of their selling may be them shipping their product out after they've made that initial contact at an event.
Gotcha.
So generally they need both services, or benefit if they have both.
Okay. How would people get a hold of you? What would be the best way to get a hold of you?
Really, the best way would be to call me.
Okay.
Which they can do at 608-215-1378. I'm in the Madison, Wisconsin area, but certainly willing to speak with anybody throughout the country. And I will provide an email as well, which is ruallen, ALLEN, at clarent.com, which is spelled clear, and then EN like November, T like Tango. But I'm out and about a lot. Folks should feel comfortable calling or texting. It's going to get the quickest response.
Clarent is CLEARNET or ENT?
ENT.
ENT.
And November, T Tango.
Okay, I'll get that in the show notes, and that's .com, you say?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'll make sure I get that in the show notes. Okay, great. Couple fun questions for you. What was your first job or business venture?
I consider my first job when I was, I believe it was 7th grade in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I got approached to work at our local cemetery. The very first thing I did there was dig a grave by hand. And then I was hired to be, they called me the landscaper, but I mowed the cemetery, pushed more around headstones, 8.5 hours as I was really working my tail off.
Wow.
So that was my first job, if you will. And what I learned is manual labor was not for me.
That's a good lesson. That's a good lesson. You were probably a better student in 8th grade as a result, right?
I studied pretty hard and I went back after that summer. Like, yeah, it's not what I want to do forever.
Yeah, I bet. What do you do when you're not working? What hobbies, interests?
I do a lot of reading. I'm a little more introverted, which I think a lot of people think those of us at network are extroverts, and I'm certainly comfortable talking to people, but I'm just fine reading and being by myself. So I do a lot of reading. I walk quite a bit. Have my bride Angela. Of course, we spend time together, and when it's not a pandemic, we do like to travel. So that would be it. And I have 2 children. They're young adults now. And I have the good fortune they still like to talk to me, and we still like to do things together. So that's a good use of my time as well.
Awesome. One last fun question. How many unread emails are sitting in your inbox right now?
I wish I would have known you're going to ask this. I'd have cleaned it up a little bit.
Okay.
I would say it's around 30 without looking.
All right, that's not horrible.
There's certain ones you don't need to read right away.
Yeah.
So I've got some. I'm guilty.
You're far from the champion of this one. So.
All right. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Well, Rusty, thanks for your time today.
It's a pleasure, Frank. Appreciate it.
Before we wrap up, remember, we're looking for some enterprising business types to join our team as franchisees of AmSpirit Business Connections. Our franchisees work with entrepreneurs, sales representatives, and professionals in their area to help them become more successful through networking in a structured, weekly morning meeting. This is a unique franchise opportunity as successful business types or professionals can add this on to what they're already doing. Again, all of our franchisees do something else. For a couple hours in the morning, only a few days a week, these franchisees work the AmSpirit Business Connections program. The rest of the time, They're entrepreneurs and professionals of various kinds. The great thing is that this allows them to make more money from professional connections and at the same time make money building professional connections. Perhaps you know someone, perhaps you are that someone. Whatever the case, to learn more about the AmSpirit Business Connections franchise opportunity, please contact me using the email in the show notes or the one we provide at the end of the program.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.